At 11. So, well, I want to start by welcoming everybody and tell you a couple things first. I'm in an organization where we fine people $50 for phones going off during meetings. So, if you'd like to make a contribution to Shriners Hospitals for Children, I'd be happy to get that from you. But if you think about it, silence your phone, and I'm going to do the same thing because I actually had mine on earlier, which I rarely do. There we go. Okay. So I want to welcome you all, and we're going to leave the slides up. We thought it might be nice to look at as we're going along, and it's so funny. There's a stage area here with some of Jeff's mementos on it, and I already see one that you're going to have to hear a story about. And I just want to say that I hope that today isn't going to be just me talking. I'm really looking forward to other people sharing some of their experiences about Jeff. My name is Rick Williams, and I want to tell you why I'm standing here, and some of you might already know. And this is very, very hard for me in some ways. Jeff was essentially like my father. He was the person that every male at some point in their life has a dream about having this really cool, great, loving adult relationship with their father, where you're like buddies, and he's no longer the guy telling you the things you did wrong or the things that you need to do. And I was lucky to have that friendship with Jeff my adult life. And so that's why I'm here with you guys today and looking forward to sharing some stories. And I'm going to tell you a couple stories about Jeff that maybe Jeff and I only know and share them with you. And some that are touching, some that are funny. I can tell you, and I'm sure many of you have stories like this too. I have a thing that I'm going to read to you a little later from Jeff. I'm going to sanitize it some because it's not necessarily a mixed audience thing. And many of our best stories are probably like that. When I first met Jeff, we actually met through scouting, which I know from looking around the room that there are a lot of faces here that have that story, that we met through Boy Scouting. And I first met Jeff. I was working my first year of summer camp staff up at Camp Gerber, and this guy had just come from National Camp School, which was a really big deal to go to. He became an aquatics director, and that's what Jeff spent a lot of his summers doing. If you want to boil it down, he was teaching kids how to swim, and he was teaching Boy Scouts how to save lives. That's what that aquatics area was about. And when you go to camp school, I don't know if they're still doing this, but they make you learn a song. And we've all probably heard scouting songs, and some of them are pretty cheesy. And I got to tell you, Jeff had a song that he brought back from National Camp School that was dorkier than most Boy Scout songs. It was called Going on a Wild Cheese Moose Hunt, which just by the title, you can be like, boy, that sounds kind of ridiculous. And it was. But the first time I heard him sing that song, he owned it like you wouldn't believe. He took this song that if you read the words, you would say, you'd never catch me dead singing that, and Jeff probably thought that too. But here he was, he hit this song out of the park, and that was the first meal that I had had as a staff member at camp. And I was like, who is this guy? I didn't know him. It turns out our lives hadn't really crossed at that point. But we got to know each other that summer, and I was a teenager at that point. And my dad passed away in those teenage years, or late teen years, and Jeff kind of filled that role for me. And it wasn't instantaneous. We were sort of friends, but we transitioned into this thing that he was really there for me in a lot of ways. And I'll tell you one, this one's a little bit of a harder one, not so much a funny story, although it is sort of funny. I got a letter from Jeff one time. So I served in the Army, and I had called him when I was home. So in my unit, you would deploy for about 6 months at a time. We'd come home, we'd get like a week off, we'd sort of reset for about a month and a half, and then we'd deploy again for another 6 months. So I called him. I got dragged onto, there are all these things that all these boxes you have to check when you come back from deployment. And in my unit, in the role I was in, I had to do one underwater dive, and I had to do one airborne jump, just so that I was qualified in that phase. And it's the strangest thing in the world to come back from a place like Iraq or Afghanistan, and after you've had beers for a couple nights, the first thing that you have to do is go and jump out of something just so you can check that box. But the unit had a standard, and that was a standard we followed. So it happened to be on this day that I was flying in a Black Hawk helicopter, and I don't know if some of you know it's one of those large helicopters that we move soldiers around in. And when you jump out of those, you're basically just sitting with your legs hanging out of the helicopter, and there's a guy behind you tapping on your head, and you jump out. And we did that. So we jumped out, and the chute deployed, and I heard a really loud noise. And what I learned later is they had a main engine failure on the helicopter that we were in, which is a really rare thing. And the pilot has to do something called an auto-rotation, which I know Jack knows about. But if anyone doesn't know, it's how you land a helicopter when it loses power. And it is usually simultaneous or tangential to soiling yourself because you have to land this helicopter, and it's a really dangerous thing. And I remember getting on the ground later, and they managed to do it safely. And this is when you get into the difference between a good landing and a great landing, whether you can fly again, whether you walk away. But they landed this helicopter, and I told Jeff this story. And Jeff was really big into aviation, and I think you'll hear some about that and see some of that in the slides. And so I told him this story, and then I was overseas again maybe about a month later, and I got a letter from him. And it had a book in it. And I got to tell you that it came to me on probably one of the worst days of my life, where we had just had things that happen overseas happen, and I was having to deal with a bunch of stuff, and I got this letter from Jeff in this book. And he sent me a copy of George Washington's Rules of Civility and Decent Behavior, which, if you know Jeff, the joke is already on the cover, sending that to you. And there's an inscription in here in a letter. And I will say that all the things I'm saying here, you might hear me paraphrase or pass through a couple things just because it's what it says. But he said, Rick, George would never have made it in the 21st century. He was the kind of guy that everyone might have goofed on. And some people might have pushed him around, and it's too bad, though, because the world would be a better place with his civility. Jeff Vail, and I left out one thing that's in there. That's kind of funny, but there was a letter in here. And, Jeff wasn't into email. Karen can attest to this. If you saw Jeff use a computer, it involved cheater glasses and somebody hunting and pecking at it like an Amish person sitting down at a typewriter for the first time. And so he sent me a note, and I'm just going to tell you a couple things from it. Jeff used to like movie quotes and jokes and everything like that, but it opens, Dear Rick, I'm writing this slowly because I know you don't read very fast. Now, he stole that. I have heard that one before. He stole that. And he says, in regards to the mishap with the Black Hawk helicopter, you need to find a new line of work. And you found an exception to the good landing versus great landing rule. And there's a couple more things in here, and he quotes a comedian. I was in Iraq at the time, and Jeff knew that. And he's quoting a comedian in here where he said, we have deserts in America, but nobody lives in them. That was something that he enjoyed saying, and I'm gonna leave out the quote here from a movie that he and I used to enjoy. And that's something about Jeff. And I know that each of you probably has a different story about him, and I'm really looking forward to hearing some of them. To some people in the room, he was a friend. He was a mentor. He was a relative, a brother. He was a husband. To me, he was a father. And I think to other people in this room, he probably occupied that role too. And he was a wonderful guy. He loved life like few people I've ever known. And he just lived it to the fullest. And I can hear his laugh in my head. And anyone that's ever heard him laugh knows what I'm talking about. It was loud. He was a guy that loved funny quotes and quips. We used to watch movies, and we would fixate on quotes from movies, and most of them were pretty blue, so I'm not going to rattle them all off to you now. But it was just part of who he was. And from that very first day that I met him, he had this charisma about him that drew you into him. You wanted to be his friend. You wanted to know him. And I was just so very lucky and so very blessed to be somebody that he sort of brought into that circle and got to know and love. And everybody has different beliefs about the way that we go through this life. Some people can make it as simple as you're born, you live, and you die. And what I think is important, though, is that most of us are lucky enough to be able to add a lot of detail to that middle phase about our lives. And Jeff was someone like that. And let me tell you a very, very funny story about something that's up here. There's a 1996 Camp Gerber coffee mug. I happen to know that this is only one of two because the camp director that year did not want to order coffee mugs. And so Jeff and Lad Culbertson went and had these coffee mugs made so that they could stand in front of the camp director one day, and I was there when they did it, holding these coffee mugs. And, that's the kind of person he was. Those are the kind of stories that we take with us. I remember, and many people that worked with him, and I hope some of you guys are going to speak a little later, will remember the whistle that is on the lanyard here. It's something that he used to have with him all the time. He used to incorporate it into songs and things like that when he was singing in the dining hall. There's an early oak pick photo here too. I want to tell you a story about Jeff that many of you do not know. And it relates to me, and it's a deeply personal story for me. So when you, and I know that Jack was in Vietnam. I know there's several people here, Jim and others that have served. When you go overseas, you experience things and you go through things that are they're difficult to process. And you come back into this world and you have these peers that you have the opportunity, I didn't mean to leave you out of that, Josh. You have these peers that you get to see that you talk about, geez, what happened, who it happened to, those kinds of things. But then when you come home, it's very strange to be removed from that and suddenly be back into a polite world where things are just happening differently, and suddenly you're at a McDonald's where a week ago you were in Iraq. And one of my traditions was when I would get that week and a half leave that I was telling you about, and I probably did this a dozen times, I would come back from overseas. I would do the things that I would have to do with the soldiers that were under my command, and then would move away for a bit. I would come home. I would have a meal with my mother. She's the first person I would see. And then I would head to Jeff's house for the weekend. And from the outside, it just looked like two people hanging out. We would do projects, and I got to tell you, he was a guy that always struck me as someone who knew everything about every little thing. If it was mechanical, if it was woodworking, whatever, he just seemed to he'd done it all at one point. So we'd work on projects for the weekend, we'd watch movies, we'd have some drinks, have a couple of big meals, sit in a hot tub. I think all of you have probably done pieces of this with him. But one of the things that I would do with him is I would be very frank and open with him about the stuff I'd experienced. And he was the one person in my life that I kept outside of the military that listened to me about that stuff. And it was something very, very private that we shared. He never asked me a lot of questions about it. It's very hard for me to talk about right now. Sorry about that. But it was also to be able to do that with essentially who was my father was a big deal to me. And that was the kind of person he was. Whether he was kidding around with you or he was there for you, he was serious, that's who he was to me. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from some of you guys because I don't want this to be just me talking. And I've got more to say to you in the closing. But I was wondering if I could ask for John Barber, who's here. John had some things that he wanted to say to Jeff, or not to Jeff, but about Jeff.
Thank you. Yeah. Good morning, everyone. So, as I was introduced, I'm John Barber. I'm just one of the many scouts that Jeff made a positive impact on throughout his life. So this is a little bit different. My first description of Jeff, from how you guys knew him. Our Scoutmaster Joel Shoemaker is also here. Brought Jeff in to teach an aviation merit badge class to our troop. And I just remember we met in this cafeteria. He was in the back, kind of hanging off, keeping to himself, very quiet. And then as an introduction, here's Jeff Vail, and he's going to be teaching the class. And, it's an older guy being introduced to a bunch of teenagers, so it's kind of whatever. And those of us broke off, went to that class, and you kind of, for the scouts at least, would kind of slip in right at the beginning of the meetings over that course, kind of slip out, and didn't really, wasn't that normal Jeff that you came to know. And kind of disappeared for a few weeks from us scouts, and I think he just had a little itch bringing him right back to the troop. And then he got reintroduced, this time as an assistant scoutmaster, where he joined up full time. And that was when he jumped in both feet forward and became that loud, boisterous, conversation controlling, keep you talking kind of guy. And it was right after that he started planning for the sailing trip. You see a lot of photos rolling around. And what he did is he took a group of us scouts up to Mackinac City from South Haven on his boat, switched crews and brought the other crew back. And he prepared this trip down to the exact detail. It was like 6 months out that we started having classes every meeting, every week during our scout meetings. So the crews from the boat break off. We have classes on seamanship, navigation, plotting, all that good stuff. And then once springtime came around, we'd get underway from South Haven during days. And those days were just to get familiar with a boat. The first day we went there, we didn't even get underway. It was just, these are the parts of the boat, this is how it works. And then, over that spring, he taught us how to sail before we went and carried out that trip, which was just excellent. So, that's a little bit of the things I was reflecting on, was how much the relationship was really calm and subdued how it started. And over the course of that trip into sailing is when him and I really began to bond. And I just found myself continuing on more and more Saturdays down in South Haven, one-on-one with Jeff, and continue sailing with him. And then more times at the house helping with projects or just visiting. And it just grew from there. It was stronger every time. Even after I got out of high school and joined the Coast Guard, I was in Washington State for 3.5 years. And every visit home involved a visit over to Jeff and Karen's. So that friendship that just continued to grow is, obviously a huge thing that I look back on, that it's just surprising how it just naturally happened. And I also start thinking about some of my tangible things that Jeff gave me. And, those things like the navigation, plotting, seamanship. I ended up going into the Coast Guard. Those are things I use every day of my life. Every day I go to work, I read a nautical chart, I plot on a map. Those are things he taught me. One very large event, it was a case I had to get on board a sailboat, take control of this boat. This was a person that would not have survived if we didn't intervene as a team and help that person that day. Out of my boat crew, there was no one on that boat that had sailing experience. It's funny to say at the Coast Guard, but we work with motorboats. So the fact that I was able to get on that boat, take control of it, intervene, that was Jeff's knowledge just working through me that saved someone's life. So that's just an immense thing to think about. That's tangible. But the intangible things are just the friendship. And I really find myself getting drawn back to just the effort that it must have taken on Jeff's part. As I go through my life, I realize that high-quality friendships take effort. They take making a choice. They take dedication. And to be that absolutely unfailing friend just takes strength. So, excuse me. So, that's why I look back on that I'm thankful for. That Jeff was that strong friend, always there for me. And I'm glad that all of us were able to experience that over our time. So that's what I'll be able to reflect on. It's just a great, strong friend.
Thanks, John. John did me a huge favor. I'm glad I'm not the only one that got choked up while he was speaking. So thank you for that, John. I appreciate that. JK isn't here, right? Because I'm going to tell a story at his expense. Okay, Jeff's sense of humor in its purest form here. He's in a 172, a little Cessna airplane, and our friend JK is sitting with him. And JK is looking out at the wing strut, which kind of comes up, and there's a little piece of plastic that I think is largely just not functional. It's just to make appearances and make things meet together. And it had a crack in it, just this little piece of plastic. And JK started to point that out to him, like, "Hey, Jeff, I think Jason was a little afraid to be in a small aircraft like that." He's like, "There's a crack in that piece of plastic." And so Jeff had just kind of come around for his final, and the way that he tells the story is, as soon as JK pointed that out to him, Jeff was like holding onto the stick. He's like, "Don't talk to me right now," like that. It's just like, and that is him, in a nutshell. That's Jeff, like pure Jeff, and he used to like to play pranks like that on people. I can tell you that if you were ever growing up and you brought and this will be as saucy as I get with a Jeff story here. If you brought a girlfriend or someone with you, Jeff had a line that he always used to love to use, and he used it frequently with people. He would always say, and let's say if it was me or something like that, he would say, "Rick, she doesn't look like a biker girl at all." that was his. He lived to meet that someone who was special to you, so that he could use that line on them, like laid in wait, waiting for that. And that was just his sense of humor. He loved dogs, and many of you probably had a chance to meet Moose or Hey You or Doppler and Coco, and they were just these dogs. Many of them were dogs that showed up on the farm. I mean, Doppler, the Dalmatian, was probably off a puppy farm from 101 Dalmatians, and he showed up one day, and they took him in, and it's so funny, Jeff took him to animal control or something, and he was with another dog, and he said, we'd really like that Dalmatian, and the guys in Allegan County Auto Control were like, then just keep him. like that. And so that's how these dogs would enter Jeff and Karen's life, and they were wonderful. I happened to be lucky to know all of them, and they had their favorites, but that was part of who he was. If you knew the dogs and you met the dogs, that was part of who he was. I was thinking of another story too that involves, and Bob, correct me if I'm wrong, I think this might involve you, and it goes way back. I actually was lucky enough to know John. John, as many of you know, was Jeff's son. And I actually knew John's music. I followed it. I knew who his band was. and Jeff was going to go see them perform. Did you go with him, Bob? Okay, so Jeff tells me, hey, we're gonna go see John perform. And I'm like, oh, really? Where's he performing at? It's this place that no longer exists. It's been demolished. It's a park now along Division in Grand Rapids, and it was called the Reptile House. I'm like, oh, I know that place. And they said, what kind of, you know what kind of music John plays, don't you, Jeff? He goes, yeah, it's real loud. It's real loud music. But, he could still love that, though. And if you knew Jeff, you knew he was a lover of music. He was a huge Beatles fan. He and I would listen to the Beatles when we were out sailing, and I knew that Jeff was really serious about the Beatles when I told him one day that I had this device. I'd gotten a record player and a setup so I could digitize records. And he's like, oh, I've got some records I want you to digitize. And they were the most obscure Ringo Starr albums that I'd ever encountered. It was like when Ringo had his career and went off, and he didn't nearly get the same success that McCartney or Harrison did. But he was a lover of music, and I see a lot of people nodding. Is there another friend or family that would like to say something? And there's some people here that I would definitely like to have speak.
Okay, talk me into it.
I was working her beforehand,
I
too.
know,
So.
he was working the room. Hi, I'm Jane, and I'm the annoying little sister. It's great to hear the stories of when he grew up as an adult. I knew him growing up as a child. He was not the same person. Actually, I don't think he really recognized that he had a sister until later in life. Used to, fight a lot, like a lot of siblings do. Kind of reminded me of one time that we did a cross-country trip to California. And, of course, we were stuck in the back seat having kick fights. And he was miserable. I was miserable. We got to the Grand Canyon. Now, have y'all seen Vacation with Chevy Chase? And it's like, I want you to get out of this car and look at this hole in the ground. That was my father. He didn't want to get out of the car to look at the Grand Canyon. And so here we are all standing there looking at the Grand Canyon, It's like, okay, back in the car, But, that was Jeff. When I met my wonderful husband, I think he, realized, oh, I have a sister. She has good taste, So and then I had children, and he teased my children relentlessly, and especially my oldest one. I finally told him, my younger one, don't hurt her too much. But we had a good relationship, and geez, we'd get on the phone and, people that know Jeff, it's like story after story, and we'd be on the phone for at least an hour or more, just yakking and yakking and yakking. Okay, that I got to go. Well, wait a minute, one more story, and it would just go on and on. So I'm going to miss that because I'm going to think of things. And, oh, I got to tell Jeff this, and that's what I'm really going to miss, because he was always receptive and to hear my stories, and certainly was receptive to hear his stories as well. So anyway, that's just a little bit of background, yeah. The only other person in this room that probably has known him the longest is my Uncle Jack. From day one, he's known Jeff, and he was a force to be reckoned with at times. So, but thank you for letting me say a few things. I appreciate it. Anybody else want to say anything?
Thank you. I'm Charlie. I'm good friends with Jeff. We've done a lot of things in scouting together. I was with him probably the toughest time in both of our lives. It was 1997 at the National Jamboree. First, we had to go to the Vietnam Wall and for the kids. I wasn't going to go. A lot of people don't know this about me, but I have a cousin that's on that wall. And I never went. Jeff put his arm around me, and we walked over there. And then we walked over and saw his good friend from high school. I didn't realize that about Jeff. And then if the kids come by and there's two adults, we're both just crying in each other's arm on the Washington Monument. That was a day I'll never forget. And it had to be maybe a week later, we're sitting in front of our tent, and the National Jamboree chaplain walked up and said, "Can I talk with you, Jeff?" And he said, "Charlie, you can stay too." And Jeff had lost his dad that day, and I was with him then. And that was hard. That was hard in life, but we just sat there together for a long time, and I'll never forget that. And I'm thankful that I was able to be with him. But to tell another good story about Jeff, I get a call. "Hey, what are you and Corey doing?" That's my son. I go, "Well, we're just sitting here at the house." He said, "Well, come on out. I'll take you for an airplane ride." Corey loved aviation, and he still does. And we get in the plane. He goes, "Hey, where you guys want to go to lunch?" "Well, I don't care." Jeff flies to Mackinac City for lunch. Not Mackinac City, Mackinac Island. So we fly there. We have lunch, and then we're on our way home. A typical Jeff thing, he says, "I want Corey to sit in the front seat with him." We're on our way home, he looks over at Corey, he goes, "You're in charge of playing jersey." He takes his hands and puts them in his lap. Now my son's about 11 years old. But like Rick was saying, that's Jeff. He just said, "Okay, Corey, you're going to fly us home." And he kept him on the pattern and let him fly for a couple hours, and it was just a great time. It was one of those times you just have to laugh and laugh and laugh. And then the last time that we were together for 5 days, we went to Florida together. We had to go deliver a van. It was so funny. We just had a great time, and then we got to fly home. So, but I will miss my friend very, very much. He has always been a great guy. There's lots of stories from scouting and other things, but those are three that I thought of today. So, thanks, Rick.
Those are good, Trev. Matt, I saw you putting your hand up too.
Hi, my name is Matt Hogue. I think those that know me know that I kind of have a sense of adventure in life, and I'm going to tell you that sense of adventure comes from knowing Jeff Vail. I think anybody that knows Jeff knows that he always had a zest for doing things. And I think for teaching, especially us young kids, I mean, it's a couple of pictures of snot-nosed 16, 17-year-old Matt Hogue up here, and it's just kind of fun to see that Jeff helped a directionless, maybe young teenager find a fun direction and a purpose for that adventure that I knew was inside my soul. You know, Jeff took me on my first really, really big backpacking trip to the Porkies. And so many great stories out of there. Ryan Creech and I were talking about that, about how him and my younger brother Ez had raspberry jello all over them, and it was the first time we ever ran into bears. So there was a bear in our camp while these guys were covered in raspberry jello. And then Ryan hung a bear bag that didn't quite work. So it was just a fun adventure, and all that was because of what Jeff had in his heart and for instilling in people and taking us on things that were adventurous to him. Took us to Boundary Waters, Ukpik, all these cold weather camping things. All those are things that I love today, and it's because I met Jeff, who instilled that adventure in me. And I'm just was looking at all these pictures, just thinking, man, all these times, great times we had together. I'll leave you with one fun story, and this was when we got back from the Porcupine Mountains for our first big backpacking trip up there. We're at Wilderness State Park. We're about to head back to Grand Rapids, be done for our trip. And I thought it was really cool when I was 16, 17. So I had about 9 piercings in my ear back then. And well, this is the 90s, so that's what you did. And Jeff found this crab leg from like a crawdad on the beach, and he shoves it in his nose. He's like, "Is this what you're going to get next, Hogue?" And and if you know Jeff, that is such a Jeff thing. And I actually have a picture of it. I wish I could have found it. It'd been a perfect one for it, where he's just like, with this crab nose stuck in his nose. It's perfect. But I think we all know that those that met Jeff is just that sense of adventure, and I think that's the one thing I'll miss the most about him is just those stories and that love and zest for life.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I don't think it's any mystery that Jeff ended up having the influence on a lot of us that he did. It wasn't an accident that he ended up as an instructor at Scout Camp, because it was part of who he was. You know, that quality that he had, one, to just make a connection with you, but then two, to want to pass something on. And I remember that trip to the Porcupine Mountains well. I remember another Jeffism from that trip. There was another guy hanging a bear bag, and it was Patrick Doyle. And Patrick Doyle had lost a bear bag on a trip up there and nearly starved to death. So this isn't going to happen to me. He spent like 3 hours hanging this bear bag. I mean, it was the most elaborate triangular bear bag hanging up in between these 3 trees. And I remember when he came down, Jeff said something to him like, I don't know, you think that's good enough? Just to kind of like mock the amount of time that he spent doing that. And then a bear actually came to camp that night. And oh my gosh, it was making noise. And Jeff and I were in tents next to each other. And I remember just about getting to sleep. And then the first cub showed up. And then another cub. And then another cub. And people were like, oh, you got to come out and see the bear. And I remember hearing Jeff going, I'm not coming out to see a bear. Stay away from the bears. And then we got up, which I think, if it's been a good time as Scoutmaster or something like that, every Scoutmaster's probably said that at some point in his life. But we get up the next morning, and there's this huge pile of bear scat between Jeff's tent and my tent. And so at some point on the circuit, when it had sheared all this bark, didn't get Patrick's bear bag, by the way. That one held true, even if it did take him like 3 hours to hang it. But yeah, that was quite a trip. And, Jeff was the kind of guy that you wanted to be on a trip like that with, because he was just really funny. In fact, there's a picture I saw, Buddy got it in the presentation. There's a picture I took on that trip where Jeff was just reading a map, and it's such a typical Jeff, because he's leaning up against a tree, and he would jut his chin out, and while he was reading, and he just had this look on his face, like the way he did it. And those are the things that we kind of hold on to and remember with someone like him. Is there somebody else that would like to say something? Another family member or scout? Anybody? See, yeah, I was working Buddy in the kitchen beforehand, too, so I'm 2 for 2 now.
Hi, everyone. I'm referred to as Buddy, but I'm James, Karen's brother. And I met Jeff when I was just probably 10 years old. And, I grew up in a household of a lot of girls. And he was like he was the big brother that I never had. And, I'm getting emotional. He, had a zest for life that was as big and imposing as his physical stature, He was just a big personality, and, he was always trying to, push things my way that I would be interested in, which I'm not, like hunting and fishing and all of that stuff, but he loved motorcycles, and he bought this huge Honda Goldwing, I think it was.
It was
yeah, so it
Goldwing.
was like a Harley, but Honda. And we were on one of the freeways here in Michigan. I was holding on to the back of it, and, I was probably a young teenager, and, and holding on to the back of him, and we're going like 80 miles an hour. And there's a blowout. Like the rear wheel blew out, and the bike just went crazy and swerved everywhere. And I mean, literally, I saw my short life flash before me, and we didn't go down. Like, he was able to keep that bike upright, and parked, the kickstand down, and then we walked down a ravine and into this random neighborhood and banged on doors, and he always had a way out, and I just will always remember that. And the other thing about Jeff is that he had this side of him that was big, larger than life, and in my opinion, sometimes it seemed gruff because I was this young little kid. But then later in life, I realized that he had this really sensitive and soft side, and that on any question or any debate, he was always important for him to look at all sides of everything, And I have a lot of colorful friends, and we used to come up from Ohio and go out on a sailboat with him, and it was so amazing. He would let us drop anchor near South Haven Beach and blast Lady Gaga on the boat, while all the other boaters everywhere is like, what is going on over there? But I am just going to miss him so much, and he was a great father to his son. And, John was like my little brother, who was, just 10 years younger versus 12 years younger than me. And the love that he gave and the support and the security to Karen all these years, I'm forever grateful for. So, thanks.
Thanks, buddy. Anybody else like to share anything? I was listening to the story of the motorcycle. I had two incidents with Jeff where one of them I took a camera out of my pocket and filmed like a last message because we were in that much trouble. And they were both on a sailboat. They were both on the prevailing wind. One was we had decided we wanted to sail across the lake. You know, we're going to Racine. That was the plan. All the weather's looking great. We got this great night. It's going to be a moonlit night. We're going to do it. And we did. And we had two people, and I'm trying to remember what the connection was, and I think they were people that he worked with at Walmart maybe. Didn't really know him well. Neither one of these guys was on a sailboat before. And we got over there, and these are when you make bad decisions in your life. Sometimes you look at the weather, and I should have known better because I've been in situations on mountains overseas where the barometric pressure starts dropping, and we decide to push out rather than hunker down, and all of a sudden we're surrounded by, you know, like a blinding snow. But we're 3/4 of the way there, and it turns out the weather's going to get real bad, and we don't want to get stuck in Racine, so we turned around. And we were in, without a doubt, what I would consider to be some of the worst weather I have ever been in on the Great Lakes. And the one thing that I was happy about when we lost the moon was I couldn't see how big and how hard the water was on the lake. I mean, we were heaved over. There was probably like, even with all the bilges running, there was probably like 1.5 feet, 2 feet of water in the boat, like in the Catalina boat, which it was, you know, if you went down into the cabin, you would have been knee deep in water. It was bad, and you know, it was the kind of time where you strap yourself in. I remember Jeff was on the, you know, on the wheel, and that was a long, long night. And he didn't actually let me take the wheel over from him until probably like the last 2 hours of sailing. He let me take it over because he'd been on it for a solid like 8 hours of some of the worst sailing. And a 32-foot sailboat sounds big, but when you're in the middle of Lake Michigan in the worst kind of weather, you might as well be riding around in a boat made out of newspaper, in a little boat, because it was really something. And again, like I said, I was glad I couldn't see how bad it was. The one thing that I do remember is, obviously, I was proud to say I was the only one that did not get sick on that one, actually, and Jeff did too, so he was working the wheel and throwing up at the same time. But one of the guys that had never been sailing before, so the boat's heaved over heavily, because we're just fighting the wind, and we've got we're not even running a storm sail. I mean, we're just enough to keep going, kind of, and to the point where what meager motor you have on the boat isn't doing anything. You know, it's not giving you any power at that point. This guy goes to throw up, and he goes over the low end of the boat. I mean, he goes down to the side of the boat that's almost in the water, and I remember grabbing him, and Jeff's just like, let him go if he's going to do it. And I'm like, no. I mean, he was just that focused, and, you know, gosh, we got through that. I'll never forget that, and I thought, man, maybe that's like the worst situation we could ever end up on the boat, and it turned out it wasn't. We were coming back in to South Haven, and we got caught in just a rapidly formed storm cell that just dropped on us. And we were, you know, under power trying to get back in, and just everything that we could do to get back in as fast as we could. And we made it into the channel when it hit us, and it spun this 32-foot sailboat around inside of the start of the channel, banged the transom against the wall. I mean, I thought the boat was going down in South Haven Channel. And we had thrown a line to somebody, and they had tied us off, and now the boat was sort of like banging against the wall, and Jeff's like, do something. So I just took my knife and cut the line, and we managed to, finally the storm kind of like blew into South Haven a little bit, and we were able to power back in. But I can honestly say those were, and again, I'm proud to say that Jeff threw up and I didn't on that one. And it was always fun. Jeff had pretty good sea legs, but I remember one time we took the boat up to Muskegon, and sometimes you could be in the calmest water, and it'll hit you. It'll just hit you, even if you boat a lot. And we had just eaten these huge sub sandwiches, and we were jaw-jacking, and Jeff's like, oh my gosh. And he just turns, I mean, we're talking a really calm boat, and he's throwing up off the back of the boat. You know, and I'm sure there's a little bit of Jeff that's embarrassed. Of course, I am bragging him to no end about it, you know, because I'd eaten the same sandwich, and I was fine. And then he had, like a switch got tripped in him, and he threw up like 4 or 5 more times on the calmest water. So I'm making all kinds of jokes at his expense. I mean, all kinds of jokes. And just won't let him live it down. And that was really something fun. And I think a lot of people had experiences like that on the boat. Probably not the first two, hopefully, but the other ones. Yeah. Anybody else have a memory they'd like to share? Or? Yeah, absolutely.
Hi, I'm James, Jeff's brother. We all, as a family, like to sail. My father The only thing I can remember about Jeff that really sticks out is sailing. Karen, Jeff, John, Imogene, my mom, my dad, and me got caught in a bad storm. And I was told to go call Mayday. Go down below, call Mayday, Marblehead Coast Guard. Mayday, Mayday, Marblehead Coast Guard, Mayday. We're just off the point of Cedar Point. Help, help. And as I was down below, waves were hitting our boat. And my mom couldn't swim, but she got knocked over. And I remember looking up and seeing Jeff wanting to jump out there and save her. I know that's kind of where he began. And our family kind of went his separate ways. You know, he taught me how to fish. He took me on fishing trips. I loved it. I will cherish it. The part of it. But growing up, I'm so glad he's touched all your lives. He never really was in my life. But I cherish every moment I had with him. I don't know what happened with the family. We all went our own ways. We all got married. We all had our own kids. And, you know, briefly we would speak on the phone, but it was, as you know, it was all about Jeff. I couldn't get a word in. There's so much I wanted to share with him. And I could never get a word in. So I just cherished what we had. I'm so glad he meant a lot to everybody here.
You know, I used to sleep a lot upstairs at the house. Oh, I'm using a mic and I have one on me. I used to sleep upstairs a lot at the house, and I remember on that dresser there's a picture of your mother and father on their sailboat that they used to keep right on the dresser upstairs in that room. I always used to see that. Anyone else have something they'd like to share about Jeff? Yeah, Ryan, who was also on that trip, that fateful trip to the Porcupine Mountains.
There was many trips. It's just, you know, I stand here and listen to all the stories everybody's telling about weather this, weather that. It just seems like he had bad luck for weather. I mean, regardless of what we did, I mean, we went to the Boundary Waters and we were a mile away from Charles Summers, and sure enough, we've got three-foot waves coming in, and we're tying boats together, and the person's sitting in the middle of the canoes bailing things out and couldn't bail it out fast enough. We ended up rolling the canoes over on this peninsula and just hunkering down and just scraping the peanut butter jar because that's all we had. And, you know, I think about just all the lives that he's touched and impacted in some way. I mean, he taught me how to work hard and play hard, you know. And one of the first trips that I went on with him, my dad reminded me of it last night. He said, you know, that guy, he came up to me and he was just real stern in my face. You know, you're gonna come pick him up if he can't make it, you know, all the way to Minnesota. And I'm like, and my dad's like, okay, whatever. And here I am, 15 on this trip, and just portaging all these canoes as much as I can, trying to prove myself. And here's Jeff, just the most calm, you know, whatever happens, happens kind of attitude. And I kind of feel like in some way I've kind of learned a lot of that in my life from him. That it doesn't matter what weather comes in or what things that hit you, you know, you'll find a way. And he taught me that, you know, don't worry about what happened. Focus on what you can do. And he's just the coolest guy in the world. And I'm just so bummed that I can't go on another trip with him and Bob and all the guys, and, you know, so.
you feel. There was a trip that Jeff and I always talked about taking, and I'm really glad to hear that John took it with him. We always talked about going to Harson's Island. He wanted to show me around Harson's Island and show me where the Sans Souci Bar was and some of those other places, and it just never came together. And I think John or somebody was telling me that you'd taken that trip with him, hadn't you, John? Yeah. And I'm still going to go back there and do that because I want to go back and see Harson. I want to go to Harson's Island and see the places that he was talking about. And Jeff could have worked for National Geographic. What's that? Perfect. I'm going to look you up because I want to see the place and see the trouble that he got into, because he said he used to run the shipping channels a bit too in a boat and caused some trouble there. Jeff could have narrated travel logs for people. When he took a vacation, and we're talking about stories, everybody would hear the story. Like, I have been to Booth Bay, Maine. Never set foot there, but I've been there. You know, I have been to some parts of Germany, not the part of Germany that Jeff went to, but I've been there too. I mean, when he would combine travel and storytelling in a way that people have made a fortune doing on television, and that was another thing about him and stories that he told, is they were vivid, and they were based on the experiences he had, and you sort of became them and became part of them. Does anyone else have anything they would like to share? Yeah, absolutely, man.
Hello, I'm one of Jeff's sister's daughter's husband. I'm probably one of the most far removed person from Jeff, probably in this whole place. But I kind of want to share about, even with people who's really far removed from Jeff, kind of makes an impression on people. The most recent time that we saw Jeff, my wife and I were traveling from Arizona. Moving from Arizona, we packed our whole house in the biggest U-Haul truck we could get, and we were coming across into Canada, and Jeff and Karen were like, well, why don't you just come over and stay at our house, so it'll be a little bit closer, you don't have to pay for a hotel. We were so grateful to have that opportunity. And I'm just kind of laughing about some of these stories about, Jeff has bad luck with weather, because sure enough, the first day we arrive in Michigan, there's a whole freaking snowstorm that just kind of covers the whole ground, and he spent all day long plowing his entire yard to make space for this massive, it must have been 40 feet long, just the biggest U-Haul truck that they can get. And as soon as I get there, he's out with his big winter jacket, kind of directing the show and telling me where to go and telling me what to do. And sure enough, we pull up beside his little barn in the back, and the ground hasn't quite froze all the way, and we have everything minus the kitchen sink in our truck, and the truck just, as soon as it stopped moving, just sunk. We were maybe 4 inches into the mud. The mud was coming up into the rim well of the thing, and Jeff's just there, calm as a clam, man. He's like, well, I'll just go get this out, and then he brings his truck out, and we can't get this thing out. And I'm internally, I'm having a little meltdown, because we got deadlines to meet at the border and do all these things, and Jeff's just like, oh, don't worry about it. If this doesn't work, we'll try this, and which we did. And then he's like, well, if that doesn't work, then we'll just try that. And then if that didn't work, then we'll call our neighbor, And then we ended up getting out, but during the whole time, I'm internally having a meltdown, and Jeff's just such a level-headed, cool guy, just being in his presence. And when people, when I was having how are we going to get out of here moment, just having his reassurance of his calmness, just always being there, and just having a cool head about him, was just kind of the way that I've always known Jeff. I've only seen him maybe a couple times before that in person, and he took me sailing for the first time on a real sailing boat there too. So, and he had me manage all the things that I had no idea what I was doing, but he told me what to do, and it was even though I had no idea what I was doing, it's just his reassurance was really kind of touching. And I think someone as far removed as Jeff, as I feel, he still had a really good impact on my life and what he meant to me. So that's my Jeff story.
That's a great story. Yeah, I just realized, because I was kind of watching the audience, Mike, if I'm not mistaken, weren't you the person that Jeff and Ladd were trying to get with the coffee mug gag? That's what I thought. I would have said something to you. I didn't know you were sitting there. I'm sorry about that. There's a very good friend of Jeff's, a lifelong friend from scouting, that would like to say something before we close, kind of to close the show out. And Bob, when you're ready.
Probably going to be very, very difficult. You need a lot of people in your life. They're casual friends. Your kids go to the same school as their parent, you know. And there are people who are guy you know at the hardware store. There are people that are just people you run across and casual friends. You don't spend a lot of time with them. You're just a casual friends. The next thing that you get into is people who are very close friends. These are relatives. I'm sorry. People you served in the military with, people you went to high school with, you went to college with, and you stayed in touch with them, and you just became close friends. And then there's what I refer to as brothers from a different mother. And that's what he was. I met him when the concept of day camp first got started. And a group of people got together, and we were going to do this day camp as a summertime activity for Cub Scouts. And so he and I were sitting at the table with a bunch of other people and going over things of what we could do, what we couldn't do, what kind of things would work. And it was just a lot of ideas. And I thought he was really very authoritative. I thought, gee, I'm not going to like this guy at all. Well, then I realized what his point was. His point was that there had to be a quality to this thing. We weren't just going to do something. There was to be quality. From that point forward, we worked together. I can't tell you how many hundreds of nights I slept in a tent with him. I can't tell you how many miles I traveled with him. But we did. We just always spent a lot of time together. Camporees, conduct derbies, order the arrow, all kinds of different camp visitations. I'll tell you a story about a camp visitation we did. We got the assignment for Camp Hiawatha in Munising in the Upper Peninsula. Now we decided just the two of us, and John Stocklesill was going to be traveling his motorhome. He'd meet us up there. So I said, okay. So he says, let's see if on Saturday afternoon. The inspection's on Monday. Okay. All right, okay. So we leave. We go up, stayed at a little motel up near Christmas, did a whole bunch of sightseeing. Sunday morning we checked out. We drove up the Keweenaw Peninsula, went up to Fort Collins at the point, came back down. We got out there, went to their administration building. They put us up in a cabin, and he finally said, well, I'm going to lay down for a while. He didn't get up till about 6 o'clock the next morning. He was just gonked out. We did the whole visitation, went through all their practices and standards. Everything was good. We left there about noon, drove right straight home. Just right straight home. We weren't going to stop at a no. We'd stop and have something to drink or go to the bathroom or something, but get gasoline. But that was about it. We just did this whole thing. That kind of gives you an idea that you spend 6 or 8 hours in a vehicle with somebody, you learn a lot of things about them. You don't know there are no mysteries here, folks. You know everything, all right? So he and I shared stories back and forth. And it just came one of those things. I went to the National Jamboree with him twice. We drove down, stayed overnight in a motel, went out, got ready to go to the Jamboree, spent a week there, and drove home. During the week, though, we would get together and just go on a little tour, see what was out there. Now, we were very busy at what we were doing, but then we could do this thing where we just go around and check out different areas, what they were doing, what the kids were learning. And that was always, that was a lot of fun stuff. A lot of talk about sailing. And I have one really interesting experience. I was in a crew of 2, him and I, and we took the boat out to check out the GPS unit. Now, the best way to do this is to go out at dusk. So the sun is setting, and you go out 13 miles, and it's pitch dark. Okay? GPS unit has gotten you out there. And we got turned around, he got everything set, and he says, okay, let's go ahead and head back in. I said, okay. Well, I was in the Navy for 4 years. When it gets dark on the water, it's dark. You see stars, you see the moon, but there's nothing else there. There's just all water. So we started heading back in. Now, we didn't have a lot of wind, so we had to use motor. That takes forever. We got back, we got tied up. He says, let's go down and get some sleep. So he went in the cabin, I went in the forward hold, went to sleep for a while. I woke up really early in the morning, sat on the fantail there, waiting for him to get up. He got up and he says, let's get the canvas on this thing and we'll go have some breakfast. We did, got canvas on, we had breakfast, and then we just drove home. That was the whole extent. The experiment was over. Experiment worked, okay? And that was how he did things. You didn't just do halfway things with him, you did whole things with him. We were really 2 completely different people. He was younger. He was from a traditional family. He lived on the eastern part of the state. I was older, grew up in a single-parent home, lived in a little small town in Berry County. But we found things that we both enjoyed doing and liked to do them with each other. That was it. There was no magic to it. We found out there were things that he knew that I didn't, and I did things, help him with something that he didn't know anything about. And he used to love to hear stories about me being in the Navy. Oh my God. It was like story time for him. He, well, what did you do that? Where'd you go to? And we go through this whole thing. He heard my entire naval history in all those years, okay? Yeah, I don't think there was anything he didn't know about that. And all of it kind of carried over. Our personal life became very, very close. We were, I don't know, just 2 people who found out that we liked something together and that we could do it together and we could have fun doing it, and that was it. There's no magic there. There's an empty place in my life right now because of that. In about a month, a bunch of scouters are going to get together, guys that we did scouting for years and years and years together. And we're going to have this breakfast, and he's not going to be there. I'm going to run across somebody that we knew, and I'm not going to be able to tell him about it. like this emptiness that won't ever really get filled up. There's one thing I want to say as my closing, and it's said at naval funerals. And the phrase is, fair winds and calm seas, your relief shipmate, we have watch.
It's tough to, did a lot of thinking about how we would close, and it's tough to, with everything that we've shared, how do you stop this moment? And the thing that I wanted to share with you guys is two things. First, housekeeping, and then a closing message. There's food over in the fellowship hall, and everybody knows that Jeff liked to eat. And there's a ton of food over there. And I fibbed to Karen a little bit. I have a friend who is a caterer, and I went to him for some advice, but I told Karen that because I wanted her to just not worry about it and let me take care of it. But my wife and I got all the food in there and some things that Jeff liked and some other things. But I told you that fib just so you'd let me take care of it. So sorry about that. We're gonna close with at the very end, I'm going to close with a Boy Scout grace that we've said many times around camp before we eat. But here's the thing that I want to offer you. And I'm welcome to anyone that wants to challenge me on this, but I think there's something that Jeff would want from you at this moment in going forward. And I thought about two things. I thought about a movie. So there's both sadness, surrounding his loss and this emptiness that all of us have, but then there's also all this happiness that was expressed about the way that he affected our lives. And he certainly wouldn't want us to dwell too much on this piece of it, the sadness. He'd want us to go forward in our lives, and he'd want to, he wouldn't be so conceited to say that he'd want to inspire us, but he'd want to take those things that he gave us that made us happy and take those forward. And so I was trying to think of something, and Jeff and I used to love to watch movies, and he used to love to watch movies even more than I did, and we would do quotes from movies all the time. And like I said, a lot of them were off color. Those are the best quotes sometimes, and you'll find those moments in your life where you can use them. There was a movie that he and I used to like to watch, and in it there was somebody speaking about the loss of his friend, not his passing, but losing contact with his friend. And it's really beautiful, and in a way it's sort of sad, and I promise it won't be the last word I say, but it kind of defines the sadness that I felt about losing Jeff. And that is that it's this notion that some birds just can't be caged. Their feathers are just too bright. And when they fly away, the part of you that knows that it was a crime to cage them up, it does rejoice. But at the same time, the world is just that much more drab and empty now that they're gone. And that describes the sadness that I feel, okay? It was tough for me to say. That was from a movie. Jeff and I used to use other quotes from that movie that were not for good company. But the thing that I'd like to think about, and what I've been thinking about, just this is my own journey, but I hope that you have it too. Jeff would want you to think about the happiness that he gave you. The picture on the front of the program was not from the Prevailing Wind. I took it from another boat, and Jeff would both love and hate it because that's a French-designed boat, and he did not like the French boat designers, but he liked the boats that they designed, which I always thought was kind of odd. So he'd never own a Juno or a Beneteau or anything like that. He had a Catalina. But that boat is kind of sailing off into the sunset. And when I think of him now, like when I visualize him, I don't know what's waiting for us. I really don't. But I like to think of him on the wheel of that boat, just sailing away into that sunset. And his hair is blowing in the wind, and he's happy as hell, and he is sailing away on some unknown sea, headed to some unknown shore. But he's just happy. And he left you with that happiness that he gave you in your life, whatever it was. And he would want you to hold on to that. And that's what he wants you to take away. The emblem that's on the back of the program, by the way, some scouts would recognize it. It's an old trail sign. So there are these old trail signs that you'd leave with like an arrow, like I went this way or I went that way. So if your buddies were out hiking, they knew which way you went. That's a very specific trail sign. It's actually on the grave of Baden-Powell as well, who was sort of the grandfather of all scouting in a way. And it's a trail sign that was left to say, it has many interpretations, but its basic interpretation is, I've gone home. You put that on there so that people knew you weren't on the trail anymore. And that's why we put it on the back of the program. So there's a funeral ceremony that I've been in before where they always say it doesn't matter whether one person or 1,000 people showed up. I can tell you, unfortunately, I go to a lot of funerals, and the turnout here, the people that were touched by Jeff, the people that came out here, thank you for being out here, being with Karen and the family and friends and just being together. Please bring appetites over there. I thought that what would we do is, any of the scouts in the audience that know this, please join me, but we're going to do a quick Philmont grace, which is one that gets used a lot, especially when someone else doesn't know a grace around the campfire. They can always go back to the Philmont grace, and it's kind of beautiful. And it just goes for food, for raiment, for life, for opportunity, for friendship and fellowship. We thank thee, O Lord. Amen. Hey, thanks so much for sharing with us and being here. Karen, thanks you for being here and supporting the family and keeping her thoughts. And like I said, take that away. Jeff would want you to go out on this day and just be happy and remember him that way. So thank you, everyone, and please come over and have something to eat.